Long before humans built the first house, planted the first seed, or wrote the first word, something walked out of the darkness and sat down at the edge of a human fire. That single decision, made not by a person, but by a wolf, thousands of years before recorded history, quietly reshaped the future of our entire species. That sounds like a stretch. It isn't. Let's start with the obvious question. How do we even know dogs are that old? The clearest, best documented evidence comes from a site in Germany known as Bonn-Oberkassel. Archaeologists there uncovered the remains of a dog buried roughly 14,200 years ago, laid to rest alongside two human beings. That's not a rough guess. 14,200 years ago, deep in the last ice age, humans and dogs were already close enough that one was buried with the other. For context, that predates the invention of writing by more than 9,000 years. It predates farming itself, the domestication of wheat and barley, the beginning of permanent villages, by well over 2,000 years. Whoever buried that dog wasn't part of an agricultural society, wasn't part of any city, wasn't part of what most of us picture when we think civilization at all. They were Ice Age hunter-gatherers, and the dog itself tells an even stranger story. Skeletal analysis shows the animal had suffered from a serious illness as a puppy, one that would have made it unable to hunt or travel normally for weeks. Someone kept it alive anyway. So why would a hunter-gatherer bother? This is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the relationship almost certainly didn't start with a deliberate decision at all. Most researchers now believe dogs domesticated themselves before humans domesticated them. Wolves that were slightly less fearful of humans could approach the edges of camps to scavenge scraps and bones without triggering the flight response of their more cautious relatives. Over many generations, natural selection quietly favored the calmer, less aggressive wolves, the ones willing to tolerate proximity to people. This wasn't a single deliberate breeding program. It was a slow, accidental partnership, playing out over thousands of years, largely without anyone planning it. Nearly every physical trait we now associate with dogs, floppy ears, curled tails, patchy coats, a tendency to bark rather than howl, appears to be a side effect of that same selection for tameness, not something early humans were breeding for on purpose. But something did shift once the relationship deepened. Genetic and archaeological evidence across dozens of ancient sites in Europe and Asia shows dogs increasingly buried with the same care given to human dead, sometimes with grave goods, sometimes cradled alongside children. Among many hunter-gatherer groups, dogs weren't treated as tools. They were treated as companions, a bond formalized well before agriculture, well before livestock, well before almost anything else we associate with human civilization. The famous image of a dog as a working hunting partner, tracking game and guarding a camp at night, is a real and much older practice than most people assume. A working relationship that let hunter-gatherers pursue prey more effectively and sleep more safely, long before dogs became pets in the modern sense. It was never just a convenient arrangement, which makes what happened next a genuinely remarkable historical turn. As humans spread across the globe, dogs came with them. They crossed into every inhabited continent, adapted to wildly different climates and cultures, and became embedded in nearly every human society archaeologists have studied, appearing in burial sites, cave art, and oral traditions from the Arctic to the Andes. In many cultures, dogs held a genuinely elevated status. Guides for the dead in some belief systems, guardians of the living in others, treated with a level of ceremonial respect rarely extended to any other animal humans kept. Now, it's worth being careful here, because the honest picture is messier than a single tidy timeline. Geneticists studying ancient dog and wolf DNA don't fully agree on exactly when or where domestication first happened. Some studies point to a single domestication event in Eurasia sometime between 14 and 40,000 years ago. Others suggest it may have happened twice, independently, in two different regions, with those early dog populations later mixing together. The wolf population that gave rise to modern dogs also isn't a direct match for any wolf alive today. It was a now extinct lineage, distinct from the wolves we see in the wild now. Researchers broadly agree on the rough window and the general process, but the precise details are still being pieced together, one ancient bone and one genome at a time. This is where the story stops being about ancient wolves and starts being about us. We tend to assume that a working relationship stays a working relationship. That if an animal was domesticated for practical reasons, it stays valued mainly for practical reasons. The history of dogs shows the opposite happened. The same basic partnership, an animal tolerating human presence in exchange for food and safety, evolved into something far more emotionally complex than almost any other domestication event in human history. For thousands of years in scattered hunter-gatherer camps, that bond was rare, functional, and slowly deepening. Within a much shorter span, historically speaking, it became one of the most universal relationships humans have ever formed with another species. Nothing about the underlying biology fully explains that shift on its own. What changed was the role dogs played in the human imagination. And once dogs moved from useful animal to member of the family in enough cultures, that shift carried forward, reinforced generation after generation by the same loyalty, companionship, and mutual dependence that started around those first Ice Age campfires. It's a pattern worth sitting with. A relationship doesn't need to start out sentimental to become one of the deepest bonds a species has ever formed. Sometimes it just needs enough time, enough shared hardship, and enough small acts of care compounding quietly across thousands of years. So the next time you think about how old the bond between humans and dogs really is, don't just think about a puppy in a shelter photo, or a service dog trained yesterday. Think about a wolf, deep in the last ice age, more than 14,000 years ago, choosing to sit at the edge of a human fire instead of disappearing back into the dark, thousands of years before the first city, the first written word, or the first farmed field. That single choice, repeated and reshaped across 14 millennia, eventually became one of the closest relationships our species has ever carried with it. Sources referenced in this video are noted in the description.